Tried to weigh me down, crabs in a barrel. Wanna take my crown, renegade. I'm lighting up the way, I'm inspired. On the trail of life. Hello. Welcome to the Power Table, conversations for Black women. I am excited about the second season. We are bringing you Black women throughout the state who are going to share their brilliance, their beauty, about the issues that are important to us and about us. So sit back, stay tuned, and enjoy the show. Hello. Welcome to the Power Table. We are so excited. This second season has just been fire. And today we're really excited to welcome Dr. Amirah Saafir.
Saafir, yes.
That's what I'm talking about. She had to give it to me, phonetically, because, I can mess up a person's name. Anyways, well, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited. It's so interesting. So I was watching a documentary, and you were on the documentary. So, of course, I was like, oh, I'm looking her up. And so then I looked you up. We scheduled a call. We had a phenomenal conversation. And then I said, I need her on my podcast. And so here we are. Here we are. So tell everybody just a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Okay. So I'm Amirah Saafir. I am a professor of child and adolescent studies at California State University, Fullerton. Yes, I'm going into my fourth year there. Mm-hmm. So, yes. And I am, in addition to being a professor, I love working with students. I am a researcher, and I study things that have to do with identity development for Black children. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of what connected me to the documentary that you're talking about. Yes, because I look at how contextual things impact how Black kids are feeling about their Blackness. That's what's important to me.
Absolutely.
Making sure that Black kids feel good about themselves.
Right. Absolutely. So, you did this documentary. You brought some youth in, some children, and you were recreating a infamous survey or study, really, around how our children perceive themselves as it relates to beauty. And so, in this particular, what are some of the things that shocked you? Just shocked you. Like, what were you expecting? And then you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Well, one thing, I don't know if shocked would be the word, but the kids were really funny. So I think the first thing that caught my attention was just the level of observation they had. And it kind of sometimes came through in their humor around like, well, this Barbie looks like my mom because my mom wears wigs, but there's so much to unpack there, right? First, it's like, I'm sure their mom was not excited to hear them say that.
To be on a documentary and say it too, right?
Exactly. But when you think about a kid seeing a doll with straight hair and associating that with being a wig, there's information to pull from that. So I think that was just the beginning of some really astute observations. There's another thing that comes to mind for me is a little boy who said that the real Barbie, which all the kids kind of unanimously agreed that Malibu Barbie, blonde hair, blue eyes, that's the real Barbie. He said, that's the real Barbie because when I go to the store, that's who I see. When I watch TV, that's who I see. And I didn't necessarily expect them to pick up on that because the kids were ages 6 to 11. I thought they would talk about what they saw and not this kind of broader societal picture that they're obviously picking up on. So I thought that was really interesting and like a wake up call for us to be like, yeah, these things are not going past them. They're noticing.
Right. They're able to see that. And then just an overall, I mean, we talk a lot about trauma that children experience, our children specifically experience personally and in community, and how that manifests in who we are as an adult, how we deal with things. And so in this regard, what do you think what impact do you think this has on children when we're adults?
Well, in the documentary itself, we see a lot of that. We see Black women who are successful, who have, made these amazing strides in their own careers and have become idols for many people in terms of confidence, and who they represent in tears, thinking about their experiences as kids, playing with dolls that didn't look like them and how they interpreted that. And even myself, my mother was born in 1959, and when I was growing up, we had just Black dolls. Like I had a big bin, and it was only Black dolls. And I didn't realize that was special until later in my life. But when I talked to my mom about it, she said, I didn't have black dolls growing up. And so that had a really negative impact on me, and I did not want my girls to experience that. So I think about how it informed her parenting years later. And so, yeah, I think the evidence is there that this impacts kids in the long term. So being able to talk to kids now while they're still kids is crucial for being able to change those trajectories moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't have any black dolls either. I didn't have that many dolls. But I didn't have any black dolls. But what's fascinating is, as I became an adult, my mother was so creative. She started making dolls, and she made only black dolls. And so it was always fascinating because she'd have a black ballerina, and and how many people would want to buy her dolls. Like that became like, I want one of Dorothy's dolls. And then when she passed away, that was like a fight, a family fight. Who's getting her dolls?
Oh, wow.
And it's like, she's my mother,
dolls.
right? And so, but I just remember people wanted her dolls because it represented us, and she would always make them, she used yarn to make their hair curly. She didn't do like, she didn't assimilate it into anything. She made it what black was, and it was so beautiful. So now that, you've done this, and like this is still a thing, what do you think we need to do?
I think that we have to be a lot more intentional about how we think about diversity. I think right now, well, sadly, we're kind of seeing those diversity efforts start to wane off, but there's been this big push for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of times we're thinking about that as a numbers game. How many black people have I hired? How many black women have I hired? And it has to be much deeper than that, than just this mere presence. It has to be intentional in the placement of the dolls, in the position they play, in the TV shows that they're on. Like if black girls can't be the center of the universe in a fictional world, how can they be the center of their own lives? You know what I mean? Right. And so I think that through this documentary, we see through these experiences of these kids, we see that just merely creating black dolls is not enough to change the overall their perceptions of their place in society. And so we have to take a much more nuanced perspective. Black kids should go to the store and see black dolls. They should watch movies and have an opportunity to see Brooklyn Barbie be the star of the movie, and not just next to Malibu Barbie as like a kind of a side character. They should have opportunities to see really nuanced representations of themselves that feel powerful and important. And I think that comes through really strongly in the comments that the kids make while they're playing with the dolls. Yeah.
And so when we talked, and you were saying, we have to go really deep into systems. And you were talking about like curriculum change.
Yes.
You were talking about, talk a little bit about that.
100%. So I mentioned, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but I'm going to come around. So I mentioned that my entry point into this documentary is because I study identity development. And initially that was at the school level. I still do that work too. So I'm looking at school context, how diverse is the school, how represented are black kids at the school, and how is that impacting kids' racial identity. And one of the findings from another study I worked on was that kids' perceptions of their representation really have its own unique impact on how they're seeing their identity. So it's not to say that the actual numerical representation of kids, how many black kids are at the school in relation to other ethnic racial groups, that's not important, but that those perceptions play their own unique role. And to me, the takeaway from that is that we have to, one, attend to not just the numbers, again, like kind of looking at it from a different vantage point, but also attend to the day-to-day experiences they're having. And two, that there's got to be a really nuanced way that we think about these contextual things. And so if we're thinking about how can kids not only be represented, but perceive that representation and experience it in a meaningful way, it has to, like you said, show up in the curriculum. It has to show up in the classes that they're taking, their math classes, their science classes, their extracurriculars. Like, it has to be a full immersive experience. It can't be well, if you look at the numbers on the school website, it says that there are 100 black kids here, because that doesn't mean they're seeing them,
right,
or even building relationships with them.
Absolutely. I went to San Francisco State University, and they were the first Black Studies department in the nation back in 1968, and their program was and I grew up in LA, which means the only history we knew of Black history was MLK. And so I go there and, get immersed in the Black Studies department. And their program you could take your core classes in Black Studies. So you could take, instead of literature, you could take Black literature. And you could take, I was an economics major, so I could take micro and macro economics in the Black. And it was from the lens of the Black diaspora.
Yeah.
And it was, so I didn't have to take history like everybody else was taking history. And I think that did inform me as a person and why I do the work that I do today, because I can see the beauty and brilliance in Black people, and particularly Black women, because my foundation in my higher education was surrounded by Blackness.
100%. I 100% relate to that. I went to Howard University for a bachelor's degree. I got my bachelor's in psychology there, and my educational experience was very similar. I remember you could take like different philosophy courses, but I took Black philosophy.
Right.
Like that kind of thing where it's like, at first you're looking at it, you're like, well, what's that? But then you get in and it's like, well, yeah, you're kind of learning from these perspectives and scholars that are not at the forefront in other curriculums. And honestly, like, you get to graduate school and I'm like, the scholars that are at the forefront of my mind are not the scholars that are at the forefront of other people's minds. And so you realize quickly that unique perspective of being really well versed in this like kind of Black experience makes you unique and like well positioned to champion Black issues. And I think similarly, that is why I became so interested in the experiences of Black students, because I'm like, how can we have more people having this experience?
And so when you think about, where we go from here, so we know it has a long-term impact. We know we need to embed it into a normal, to make it normal, right? That it isn't these, you get an elective. In California, we do have ethnic studies embedded into our high school curriculum now, because, policy really does change everything. But now we know it, we have the data, we can, experience, but yet we still will turn on a movie, and within the first 15 minutes, you don't see one Black person or a Latina or a API, an indigenous, nothing. And you go, did anybody on the set realize that there was like no minorities while they were filming this gig? How do we disrupt that?
I know. I feel like that's the big question. And there's no like simple, straightforward answer to it, because you're right. All the information is there and yet it's not being used. And I think that speaks to the systemic issue that we're always talking about, where, okay, so the information is available, but do the stakeholders care about it? What are people's bottom lines? I think a lot of times the bottom line is money. And there's this false belief that things that center people of color, things that center Black people won't make money. But then you hear a story like what you told about your mom making dolls and how everybody in the neighborhood was like, I need these dolls because the demand is there. And, to be quite honest, I'm not 100% sure how to change that perception. But I know that we have to keep applying pressure, and I know that we have to keep on. I think it's like a we have to attack it from multiple angles. We have to keep pushing the information. We have to keep putting pressure on those stakeholders and keep on creating opportunities like this podcast, like this organization that put the spotlight on Black kids and on Black people and shift the narratives that are out there. Because even with like DEI, as much as we can, critique these DEI efforts, it did put bodies in rooms. Now, what the agency those bodies were given, the value, not necessarily there, but it did put bodies in rooms. Sometimes you have to just apply pressure to just do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually was one of those bodies in the room over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push, through Glenda Gill's work, put pressure on the automotive industry. The Honda, Nissan, and Toyota, and said, we buy your cars. Two, we need to see diversity. And Toyota committed $7.2 billion. Honda said, we're not going to do that, but we're going to create positions in all of our areas, not create a head diversity person. And then Nissan did something different. And so that I went to Honda, and one of those positions was my position, and I managed all of the relationships and corporate, I was corporate affairs. So I did all the relationships with NAACP and Reverend Jackson and everything, and did all of their community benefit work, where we started Honda Battle of the Bands and did all kinds of stuff. And but that was so important to be embedded in those departments, because I was able to understand the business of what else was happening.
Yep.
And not have that head. And so that's 25 years ago. And then today, you know, we went back to getting a diversity head, but didn't give them any, you know, P&L power, which is profit and loss. They weren't in the strategy teams. You know, if you put them in HR, that tends to mean, you know, HR is a supportive area. It's not a decision making or a profit area in the corporate. And so how do you think we need to even make sure that when we have a diversity position, that it's a diversity position that's going to move our agenda forward? It's not just putting bodies in the room.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I think that in some ways what you described is what we do. So personally, I got my PhD from UCLA, and I had
you're like a small percentage.
Yeah.
Small.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Of Black PhDs, and even from UCLA, even more.
But across the state, across the country.
Yep.
I mean, it is such a small percentage. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had a fellowship when I went to UCLA. It was through the UC HBCU fellowship program, and it was a program that they put into place, I think around like 2013, 2014, to help garner attention from HBCUs. And me and like my friends from the cohort, we laugh about this because we're like, they didn't know what they were doing when they got all these HBCU students and said, oh, we want to bring you all in, because it was we have a perspective, right? And we came in and we moved in those perspectives, and we challenged things, and we were difficult in some ways that they didn't expect. And I think, you know, when I look back on that time and I think about how even that program has changed, the resources they made available to the students that they bring in, the kinds of things they're considering, that I'm like, oh, I wish that was there when I was there, but I'm so glad you have it now. I think it's because we came in with our perspectives, and we weren't afraid to be those people, even when it felt a little uncomfortable, or even when it felt like, oh, this is not what you wanted from me, but this is who I am, so this is what you're going to get. I think that if we keep on showing up in that way, I think that's part of the work, while also acknowledging that that's hard, and it feels isolating, and it can really take a toll on you, mentally and emotionally, and we have to balance those things. But I think showing up as ourselves and figuring out the best way to leverage those positions is the best that we can do, in addition to making it clear that those roles are not, even if you just created it for kind of the vanity of it, that's not what it is. That's not what it's going to be. And that's not what's needed. And continuing to make that clear.
Right. So what's next for you?
For me, that's a great question. So this Black Barbie study has like blossomed into its own thing. So when I became a part of the documentary, it was on a consulting basis to help them figure out how to set this up. After we got the focus groups together, we got the kids and the dolls, and we saw what happened, was like, oh, wow, this is really rich. And so it has since become my own personal research. And so I have been analyzing the focus groups. I have a small research team of a graduate student and 2 undergrads, really phenomenal Black women, working on the project with me. And I would like to see not only the work be disseminated into the world, because there's so much more to pull from it than just what showed up in the documentary, but to see it brought to scale, and to see more studies and more research kind of looking at these nuanced perspectives of Black kids, and how they're perceiving these kind of environmental cues around what being Black means and what being Black in America means.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate you coming on short notice. I really, really appreciate it. And I just look forward to all the work that you're doing. Hopefully, we'll be doing work together as well through the Black Women's Think Tank. And you're always welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's truly my pleasure. I'm so glad to be connected. This was amazing.
Yes, thank you. Wow, wasn't that great? I hope you enjoyed the episode and you found it empowering. You can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Also, you can find out more information about the California Black Women's Collective Empowerment Institute at www.cablackwomen'scollective.org. See you next time.